Many years ago, I received an email from a head of marketing by the name of Tom Innsbrucker with a really cryptic line just below his signature, and it was just simply a quote. And the quote said, "Don't be a Bert Hinkler," which of course begged the question, who the heck is Bert Hinkler? I mean, has anyone ever heard of Bert Hinkler? And actually, it turns out, of course, as researchers, we dug into the story, and the story is really interesting because it has hugely important and interesting implications and draws on the world of cognitive psychology, even the structure of scientific revolutions. But most importantly for all of us, it has really interesting and important implications for how we think about the messages, the content, the information that we all put out into the marketplace as part of our marketing strategy or sales strategy. What? All right, so who the heck is Bert Hinkler? Well, let me back up. If I were to ask you who is the first human being to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, we'd all know the answer. The answer, of course, is Charles Lindbergh, and one of the most famous feats of daring ever in the history of humanity, and that is an individual's name, complicated as it might be, at least for that particular event, we have celebrated to this day. But if I were to ask you, okay, who is the second person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean shortly thereafter, none of us would have any idea. Plot twist, it was Bert Hinkler. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because none of us knew that, right? None of us ever heard of Bert Hinkler, who, by the way, turns out to be an incredibly brave and amazing aviator in his own right. And many of the feats that he did flying from the UK to Australia, for example, is just kind of mind-blowing for the time and the technology. But here's where the story gets really, really interesting. So we know the first, we don't know the second. But if I were to ask you, who is the third person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean? You know who that is? That's Amelia Earhart. And what's interesting is we've all heard of Amelia Earhart. So why is it that we've all heard of Charles Lindbergh and we've all heard of Amelia Earhart, the first and the third persons to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, but we've never in the world heard of the second, Bert Hinkler? And the answer is actually quite interesting. And the answer has everything to do with what's called schema theory, or if you will, the world of mental models. Because what happened is when Charles Lindbergh flew solo across the Atlantic Ocean, at the time he did something that no human being had ever done before. He did something that none of us knew was even possible. So he took our mental model, our schema of the world and how the world works and what is possible, what is not possible, and essentially he broke that schema. He showed us that there's a completely different way that reality can work that kind of, well, in today's vernacular, blew our minds. And so that's memorable. That sticks out because that forced us to rewire the scaffolding, the structure of our mental model such that we could incorporate that new information. There's a whole bunch of cognitive behaviorists and psychologists, people like Jean Piaget, who wrote about this stuff in ways that we always knew, but we never put into our research because nobody wanted to know about this stuff, at least not in the world of sales and marketing. But nonetheless, it's all there and it's all studied and it's super interesting. Now, okay, so what about Bert Hinkler? So Bert Hinkler flies across the Atlantic Ocean solo, blows our minds again, maybe, except he doesn't. And the reason why is because what he did is not disruptive to that mental model, which now Charles Lindbergh has rewritten for us, but rather confirmatory. He shows us, he confirms something that we already knew to be true, rather than teaching us something that we didn't know was possible. Okay, fine. So then why in the world do we know about Amelia Earhart, beyond, of course, the tragic and mysterious disappearance of her plane over the Pacific? Well, we know about Amelia Earhart because she also did something first. She was not just the third person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, but at the time, she was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. And at the time, of course, that again was something that, at least for the people in the world of the time, that was also mental model breaking. I could totally see why a man could fly solo across the ocean, but holy mackerel, a woman can do it too. That kind of blew everyone's mind. Again, vernacular for that rewrote everyone's schema, their mental models, and it forced us to restructure in heads the art of the possible. And I think that's what's so interesting is whereas Bert Hinkler is this perfect example of someone who confirmed a mental model, Amelia Earhart is someone who actually showed us the power of breaking that mental model and showing us something that we've never thought of before. Why does all that matter? Because it shows you the power of an idea, of a message, of an insight that can actually reframe, that can actually deconstruct and reconstruct a mental model. And as we're thinking about how we can stand out in today's marketplace, in a world of the sea of sameness that I talk about all the time, the world of undifferentiated solutions, and going back to the last breakdown video around nuance and how important it is that customers see difference, it becomes critically important in this world that we find and understand our customer's mental model, which means empathy. We first have to understand, not just, if we want to understand how our customers think about their business, we don't just need to understand their business. We need to understand how they think about their business. What is their mental model? And then we need to find some way to force them, hopefully, productively, to rewire that mental model, to reframe that mental model, to break it, show them something unexpected, because that's memorable and that sticks out. And that is the power of reframing customers' perspective, not of us, but customers' perspective of their own world. So if we want to stand out, if we want to be sticky, cognitively speaking, then don't be a Bert Hinkler.